Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Week of Conversation 2021 and to this public discussion webinar, Public Kinship, a Leadership Strategy for America. This webinar is being hosted by Neighborhood Associates Corporation, a nonprofit headquartered in the District of Columbia. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today for this conversation. Thank you to our panelists and to their respective organizations for all of their work and for participating in this discussion. And a special thank you to the Listen First Project for driving and organizing the National Week of Conversation. Here is the president of Neighborhood Associates Corporation, Dr. Bobby Austin.
Well, it is a wonderful, bright afternoon here in Washington, D.C. And I want to thank our panelists for deciding to be a part of this with us. We are very excited about this program and what it can do for our country. Certainly it is important start in finding ways to communicate and to talk with one another. And I don't think any of us could be more, how shall I say it, more excited about this than someone like myself who's been at this for quite some time. I am very, very pleased to say that we are working with Listen First to bring you this program and others that will be happening in the future. At Neighborhood Associates, we are very engrossed in developing what we call our Public Kinship Initiative. And today, we will try to do some discussions in and around just what that means. Before we do that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves.
Well, my name is George Spencer. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I do a couple of things. One of them, I'm the national president of the organization Men Against Destruction, Defending Against Drugs and Social Disorder, otherwise known as Mad Dads. I'm also the founder and president of the Pittsburgh chapter. I'm retired from the United States Postal Service. However, I remain an officer in a union called the National Alliance of Postal and Federal Employees. So I tend to live a life of service. You know, I've been attracted to things that serve humanity and social service in the community. And I got attracted to that type of work in the workplace as well with the union. Also serve as an elder at Covenant Church of Pittsburgh, where I'm also very active member of that particular congregation. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm married, have 3 adult children, and by way of my second marriage, my first wife passed away in 2018. I married again in 2020, and I had 3 adult children, now adult children, by my first wife, and inherited a son in my second marriage. So grandpapa 3.
Very good. Okay. Marlisha, what about you down there in Louisville?
I'm a Louisville native, so Marlisha Woods, and I'm a visual artist, an interdisciplinary artist, so that encompasses a lot of things. It's between painting and mixed media art, wearable art for the Muhammad Ali Center. I use a sustainable design company, and so essentially all of the wearable art is made out of eco-friendly materials. So we're thinking about environmental justice in the States and then of course abroad. When I'm not doing that, I'm teaching. So if I'm not creating art, I'm teaching it. And I just happen to be connected with Neighborhood Associates, with families, our artists, creators, and teachers. And so I'm glad to collaborate today with colleagues, people I get to see or get to connect with year round, but here we are today.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Marlisha. Melly, what about you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Meli. I'm native from the occupied territory of the Muiscas, Caribbean, and Arawak people, so-called Colombia in South America. Here in DC, Piscataway lands, I have a Latin American theater company with other Latin American artists. I'm a teaching artist and a performing artist. In Teatro La Bolsa, that's the name of our company, we work community issues through performing arts, and we aim to create artistic projects based on contextual situations. So that's like some of the work that we do right
Very
now.
good. Excellent. Octavius?
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Octavius Brown. I'm originally from the DMV area. I'm based here out of Southeast Washington, D.C. And what I do is basically I create intentional opportunities for youth development and family engagement by providing quality access to STEM and STEAM curriculum and enrichment, either in OST time or throughout the school year calendar. So I work in several different fields. It can be anything from athletics, like I said, to reading and math enrichment. But my job is to create the safe environments for kids and families to come together and take part in these things. So I strive to basically engage the community and just provide those safe environments. So we book spaces, we have community centers, we work with our local church and our local police department to provide these spaces and opportunities for growth and development.
Very good. Well, thank you all. You're all engaged, and almost everyone's in the arts, except for George, I guess. But maybe you're drawn to this. But it's good to see you. I will say just a bit. I am Bobby Austin, and I have been involved in this work more than 25 years. I did a book called Repairing the Breach, and that book dealt with African American men and boys, and Public Kinship came out of that work because we were trying to find a way for young men to be counted as worthy, and for them to see themselves as worthy in participating in their society. And at that time, only George and I probably were alive at that time. The rest of you all look pretty young. They were calling young Black men, they had a terrible name. I will not call that name, but it was a name, and Predator was part of it. But we were like, oh, this really cannot be something we want our young men to have. They are not predators, and that they are a part of this society. And how do we make them see that they are a part of it? Because sometimes we pick up what we hear in the in our cultures and on our televisions and our radios, particularly from our CDs. And we thought public kinship was the way to go, that if we could entice young people, if we could entice adults, if we could entice all of us to say that, well, quite frankly, these are your children, these are my children, these are your children, these are all of our children. So we're all publicly related. Well, from that, we developed and we created and we worked, and we sometimes fell down and we would get up and we'd start over again. But the point is, we have been working on this for quite some time, and with still lots of work to be done. It is a work in progress because it is an idea that is definitely a unfinished kind of work, because we have to try and define it. Public kinship sounds a bit utopian, I mean, it sounds like, really? I mean, I don't think we're all publicly related, but I think we are, and I think it's possible. And so I think the answer is yes. But the point is, do we wish to do that? I think we only began to feel nervous when we watch our fellow countrymen basically attempt a coup on the national capital of our nation, and actually with the intent of killing people. So this was not a play thing. This is not a drama that we lived through on the 6th. It was real. And if nothing else, we should all pay attention to and pay much attention to the factor that a government can be overthrown at any time. Anyone's government can be overthrown. We sometimes think, oh, we're safe. This won't happen. Well, it can't. If you destroy the social fabric of your country and you have nothing that holds you together, then why can't it be overturned? Why can't you lose? Yes, you can lose it. Just like you gained it, just like you were born into it, it can leave you. It can go away from you if you don't nurture it and if you do not find ways to mend it, to bring it back even beyond where it was. Because some people will say, well, we never were related. That's in part true and in part not true. There are ways that we can depend upon each other, because the thing about public kinship, it's not about other people. And this is why I lose a lot of people when I'm talking about this, because public kinship is about you. It's about me. It's an I thing. You know, there are some times where we say, oh, don't be selfish. Well, this is one of those things where you need to be selfish. Public kinship is a me thing. It is not about my brother, my father, my sister. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of this prayer. I am the person who must venture into this, not leading someone. We all like to tell someone what to do. You go do this and you do that, and we love to delegate. Now, this particular initiative is about delegating something to me. It is a me thing, something that I must do. Now, that is difficult because it's hard for us sometimes to understand just exactly what that means. If I'm not leading the parade, then there is no parade. Well, maybe it's because this is not a time for a parade. This is a time for introspection. This is a time for understanding who we are, or who I am, and how do I affect my community and the people in my community. Kinship is nothing new, but when we say we're kin, we all want to think of, well, I'm related to you, and I'm related to you, and I'm related to, but I'm not related to you. Now, that is the part that is so interesting to me about public kinship, because it says that, in fact, I am related to everyone. I will tell you a simple and an actual story. I went to a meeting. It's an interracial meeting in Michigan many years ago. And we were at tables, you know, and just like I had you to go around and say who, you know, one of the things they had us do was to say where you were born or where your ancestors came from. And there was this very nice white lady who was sitting there, and she had been talking to me, and we'd all been talking to one another. And she said, well, my ancestors are from Woodburn, Kentucky. Now, you've never heard of Woodburn, Kentucky, because most of the people in Woodburn, Kentucky have not heard of Woodburn, Kentucky. It's just that small. I would say there are, I don't know, maybe 10 families, 15 families. So I looked at her, and when it was my turn, I said, you know, I am from Woodburn, Kentucky. Well, the whole table sort of like, really? Do you guys know each other? And I said, well, no. And she said, no. And I said, well, but I have relatives who were there about a generation ago. And she said, well, what was their name? And I said, well, my grandfather on my father's side was Austin, and on my grandmother's side, it's Moore. And she said, well, I knew some Moors, but we were Bluets. And I said, oh. I said, well, I think we're related because the Bluets are our relatives as well, direct relatives. Well, the whole table was in commotion trying to help us figure out, and we actually were. We were actually related to one another. But when I went, I was so excited. We made a pact and we'd see each other. I called my father when I got back to my home in Battle Creek. And I told him this exciting news. And you can't appreciate this unless you knew my father. My father was a very slight man, very calm, unlike me, not animated, just very, he smiled a lot, but he was just very calm fellow. And I remember on the phone, he said to me, he called me Bob. He said, Bob, what are you saying? I said, well, I think I found a cousin. And her name is such and such and such and such a Bluet. And he said, wait, let me stop you. He said, who asked you to find me cousins? Now, what he was saying was, I am not related to whoever this is you have drudged up out of our past. And if I wanted to be, I would have told you about it before now. And I think if you know your older relatives, they can be like that. They can be very sweet and very kind and very loving until you hit the wrong button. And I had unintentionally hit the wrong button. He did not see that as interesting, as funny, nor as public kinship. But for me, it was like, what an adventure. For him, it was a stain. It was a moral stain. And I won't go into all of that. But what I'm trying to say to you is that we will each sometimes come to a point where we're looking at something at very different ways, very different points of view about kinship. Well, this lady actually is a direct cousin of my grandfather, who was the only boy of this particular family of women. And in fact, property was, things were left in. But the point is, I would have thought that my family would have been absolutely happy to hear this, but they were not. And I won't go into why, because I think those of you on this panel will know why they were not all that pleased. But the point is this: public kinship is the kind of thing where you discover something that I discovered, not my dad, because he wasn't interested, but I discovered it. And I made her my friend. She is a friend of mine. I didn't put her on my father. I didn't say, Dad, you got to call Dr. So-and-so, because that was not for him to do. This generation, it was for me to do. So kinship is a strange and a wonderful thing. It's about how we accept what we find and how we work to view it. We always, how should I say it? We always quote Dr. King at every moment of the day because he was so wise and he says so many wonderful things. And there's a wonderful thing that he says in his letter from Birmingham jail. This is, in a real sense, all of life is interrelated, and all men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We're tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And that's the I part of this. And that's the worldview you are doing public kinship, because it is both ecumenical, it is cultural, and it is political. And so it's when we are delving into this whole issue of public kinship that we try to find shared experiences. And shared experiences will eventually lead you to the development of a common culture. So I'm going to do those 8 things that we talk about, or 7 things that we talk about that help us to understand how to come to grips with public kinship in our work. Now, one thing I want to tell you, I had to do this for some people not long ago. No, you don't have to follow each step. No, the steps don't come 1, 2, 3, 4. The steps may be in between. You may leave many steps out. But the point is, the idea is to get from not knowing something to appreciating something and building and assuming public kinship. Because if we do not, if I cannot find a way to be public related to the Proud Boys, we're not going to have a country. And about 3 years ago, when I was at Harvard, we were doing some work. They were looking at the original work that we did at Kellogg. And George, you'll remember that because you were part of that. And they were very impressed, these academics from the titular head of academia in the world at Harvard, and what we had done, in that it was the simple things that we did. One was time management, how to wisely use your time. And one was this resiliency and introspection. And those are very important things. So I just sort of incorporated some of those things into public kinship. And here we go. One of the things you do is you need to do, and you should do, as you're thinking about this for yourself, how do I do an environmental scan of myself? This environmental scan is inside of you and around you. It's your eye view of your eye world. This is an inward journey, taking that inward journey and assessing yourself. That is so hard to do. But if you don't do that, then you really cannot lead yourself out of what is, I would consider, bad habits and bad ideas. One of the things that people say, so it's a very interesting way of saying it nowadays, they say you go down a rabbit hole. What that means is you go down into something and you can't get out of it because you can't make a good decision as to how to get out of that particular thing. So self-leadership, how do you lead yourself? That's what that environmental scan is all about, taking inventory and beginning the hard work of thinking about yourself and how you interact with the rest of the world. Now, once you do that, I know this, you can suspend judgment. And that's what my dad couldn't do. He could not suspend judgment on my finding him this cousin. He was not interested at all, but I was. So I had suspended my judgment about white people. I was like, wow, I have this cousin who's from Woodburn, Kentucky. How wonderful. Not that I didn't have other cousins, but I was just delighted I found this person. But if you have children and you tell them to do something, and they always come back to you because they always, I hate to say this, do the wrong thing. And you say, but I didn't tell you to do that. I said, well, Dad, you told me to love everybody. You told me to like it. I said, yeah, but I didn't tell you to lose your mind. Don't lose your common sense. That's a very important thing that you must tell your kids and tell yourself. Look, suspend judgment, but retain common sense. So that means don't go out and walk into the middle of the street, let a car hit you and say, yeah, but I was suspending judgment thinking they would know I was related to them and they wouldn't hit me. It doesn't work like that. Use common sense. Then the third thing is ethical leadership in the development of a moral mind, which sounds very highfalutin, and it actually isn't. The moral mind is that voice that speaks to you in the dead of night. You ever hear preachers say, I can get up at midnight and preach my sermon because it is so tied to his inner self that his moral mind could stand, and at any moment he could give that recitation. And in this sense, that recitation is do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Now, I'm not preaching religion, but what I'm saying is at least the 3 major religions, and I hate to say it in those terms, but if you were to look at a few major religions, they all basically have a strata which says, treat everybody the way you would like to be treated. And boy, if that isn't the essence of public kinship, that is the development of the moral mind. It's creating a vocabulary around which you can support moral actors in your communities. Now, we're all very afraid to do that now because when we do it, we think we're going to step on somebody's toes. One of the things I think that has happened with our religious organizations, they become very timid. They cannot be moral actors because they cannot say to people, it is immoral to call your sister a name like that. That's one kind of morality. The other kind of morality is peace morality, how to have peace in your community, how to act on peace and peace initiatives in your community. It's treating each other as you want to be treated. Now, if we could just drive that one thing home in the body politic of all of our communities that we serve at the NAC, that each of us will treat the other as we would like to be treated, we will have won this game and we will have reconnected all of the people in this country to a new sense of purpose. So that means taking a stand, and that stand then is a purposeful moral action of peace in communities. I led a peace initiative in Hiroshima many years ago, and when I finished my talk, one person said, well, that was so simple. I said, that's peace is about building networks and understanding with the person next to you. It's about breaking bread with that person. It's about feeling comfortable with that person. I was really talking about public kinship at least 20 years ago when I was leading those kinds of things, because we get caught up, and I don't want to do that with this particular initiative, having too many steps. That's why I said in the beginning, sometimes you don't need all the steps. You just need one or two of them to lead you to the ultimate goal of creating public kinship. So once you take a stand, then you can participate, and you can participate easily. You can create ways for people to participate. I don't know whether you can pull up the calendar that we have created at NAC, but this is going to go public as of today. And this calendar is one way for you to participate. And we're going to offer this to the nation, and we're going to do it each year. And it is a calendar of public kinship. You will have thing, and then you go through January and you lay out various things that you are thinking about. This month I will listen to. All right, I will read. I will reflect on. See, it's all about but it's very simple. What will you reflect on? What will you read? And what will you listen to this month? It's a journal. You can write in it. You can talk about it. You can lay out structures for yourself. To me, this is one of the greatest gifts that you can give anyone. When they did the evaluation of our programs at Kellogg, we were not looking for this, but we had kids to do journaling and to calendars. That was the most important thing that they reported back to that helped them. Time management and a calendar. Reminding them, did you look on your calendar? What time was it? When we were supposed to be there? So this particular calendar is a public kinship calendar. It's your calendar, and it will help you stay on target and create your targets for what you want to do. You want to get that oil painting painted and done and ready, and you're not like me and you procrastinate sometimes. You can get those things done. You can lay out the structures in your life that you want that will help to create public kinship. Now, I'm going to hasten just to end these last two because they are basically one and the same. And that is assuming a common culture. We are all different. We know that, and I think we appreciate diversity. But diversity must be struck within a balance of commonality. Because my goodness, if we're all different and so different, then we have nothing in common, then we will not have a place to live. It's just ridiculous. It won't work. So what we have to do is learn how to measure those aspects out so that we can assume a common culture, that we do have things in common, that we do share things that are alike, and that we do have more things in common than not. And that's very important. When we get to the end of those steps, we can then say, I have created public kinship with the lady down the street who I didn't speak to for the last 5 years. I know who she is. She knows me. We share cooking. We share picking flowers. We share a relative. We share something in common. We have a public, if not a biological kinship with one another. The ability to talk openly about our health and our wellness and practicing courtesy and kindness. I know we pick on our children sometimes, but I tell you, I am often embarrassed, all children, doesn't matter what color they are, with how unkind they are to each other and to people around them. If we could just teach them the common ideas of courtesy and kindness, and that will give us the kind of assumption of a common culture that we need.
Well, if I could start, one of the things that really stood out to me in terms of public kinship is about the way you arrange your mind and your thinking. You can't possibly hope to reach a broader audience if you don't have broader thinking in mind. It brings to mind a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. It is, if we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change.
Ah, I like that. Send us that one.
Yes, as well, I'll tell you the revised quote when I'm done. As a man changes his nature, so does the attitude of the world changes towards him. And the quote that we all know is, "Be the change you want to
You
see."
want to be in it. Yeah, okay.
So that's the one we use, the generalized quote. But I wanted to give that more authentic quote, because you cannot change the world if your mind don't have a change mindset. If you yourself don't have a change mindset. And that's kind of how I go forth in my community and building public kinship, is starting to meet my families that I work with where they are. I come into your community. I don't ask you to come out of your comfort. I come in and I get comfortable where you're comfortable at. And then we start building that, because I tell you my areas are capacity and asset building, is working with what we have. And we all have a common picture that we want to see for our world. We want peace. We want solidarity. And we want liberty and freedom for everybody. And going back to the events of January 6th, that built, of course, much like 9/11, that built a whole solidarity around public kinship, because people didn't like seeing their freedoms threatened.
Exactly.
And much like January 6th, we're in the same boat. We might not come together on our common threads everyday common threads. Let's say whether it's economic, social, political. But when you get down to our basic freedoms, we always seem as a country to come together in solidarity behind, we do not want you to tread on that freedom. We are patriots of this country, no matter the color, whether you were born here or you are a citizen now here. We're all here for the same reason. And it's because this country has such rich ability to afford us those types of freedoms, but we've got to work for them. As we've seen, specifically in African American culture, it is never easily and uphold it. And so in public kinship, to me, it's building that solidarity in my community. So I want to share a quick story. Just a few days ago, a young man was killed right in front of my front door. Um, it was a very traumatic experience for myself and my two sons who witnessed the event. And we didn't think twice. We heard gunshots. We saw 2 young men hurt. We ran outside. What can we do? How can we help? My son was putting pressure on a wound until the police arrived. It was very upsetting for us because here we are talking about police brutality, and we are just as brutal to ourselves. Because this young man wasn't shot down by a cop. He was shot down by another young man his age, or so to speak, where, we're guessing, but I know it wasn't a cop, And so in order to build that public kinship for our safety in our communities, we've all got to be speaking the same language. And I wasn't here. I just happened to be going out of town that day. But the young man who survived, his mother came back and knocked on the door, and she was just like, tell her I said thank you. She didn't have to come outside. She could have stayed in her house and just told the police what she saw when they got there. But she came outside and she put herself at risk, to make sure that both men were fine. Unfortunately, one of them did not survive. But that is what I do. And sometimes the situation is not safe. Again, if you recall, a few weeks ago, a young lady was shot in another one of our communities over in Parkside. The community came together for that young lady. And it's because that's that public kinship piece. We all want our children to be safe when they exit our homes. We all share that same commonality. And if we can't be there to prevent it, we are there to support one another after it happens. Unfortunately, we don't want to be there after it happens. We want to be able to prevent it, but see the benefit of having that on both sides. Our children, our families are traumatized by it, but we keep moving on. We keep the positive mindset that we can still make it out of this. And so I just wanted to say that is be the change you want to see in the world. And I want my world to be safe. I want my children to have equitable opportunities, regardless of their income level. And so I started as a volunteer parent. I did not see that equitable opportunity. I came out of one of the top high schools in Virginia in 1998, in Fairfax County. It was one of the top high schools. My very first elementary school was one of the best elementary schools in the country at the time. And I moved down the socioeconomic ladder is what happened. I didn't know it at the time. But when I got to 3rd grade and I was 2 to 3 years ahead of my 3rd grade peers, meaning we were doing long division, they didn't understand it. I was like, I didn't understand it. It was at that point, I think I'm 9 years old, and I'm going, hey, I'm going to make sure that kids in my neighborhood know the same things that kids in other neighborhoods know and have the same opportunity. And that is how I work at building public kinship. And that is through creating and facilitating equitable and high quality programming for my parents and for the youth here that I serve in Southeast Washington, D.C. I used to be a former parent coordinator for the National Center for Children and Families. And we did a year-long calendar of Saturday school, actually raised the test scores of our community school, reading and math. They were 1st in math and 5th in reading after that 16 weeks of Saturday school. And that was a program that I helped write for NCCF. Parent University, we always rounded out our year with a big parent summit where we would bring the talent of our parents together with the opportunities from the community and just have a whole event where you're sharing your expertise, you're networking with other parents who are doing things you want to do, and connecting them to opportunities within the community. And that to me is the foundation for public kinship. We all have a single goal. We all want to be successful, but we don't all have equitable opportunities to gain access to those things. And so that I'm an intermediary for equitable access. If I got to go get the vendor and bring them to Southeast, that's what I do. I do it through several facets. I do it through Girl Scouts. I've been a Girl Scout adult troop leader for 12 years now. And it came out of a sense that, hey, there's Girl Scouts. Nation's capital is the biggest council in the nation, in the world, actually. We are the biggest council group of people in the world under Girl Scouts USA. And yet girls in Southeast and Southwest and poor communities in DC don't even know what Girl Scouts is. And so I wanted to change that because Girl Scouts affords an opportunity for community and civic engagement. They have a whole curriculum built around it. And these are the lessons that our children need now, even if it's through girls or if it's a boys program. But to me, that is the foundation. Change, being the change, and then giving it back to the people where I live and where I serve. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Extraordinary. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Who's next? George?
Well, I'll share some things. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be part of the discussion. And I really appreciate the material that's been developed. It helps me as I strive and as the organization that particularly MADDES that I am involved with to have a construct, so to speak, to help raise the standard of morality in the community. That's one of our goals. And what attracted me to MADDES really came out of initially an experience that was taking place in my own household. My wife and I had a concern that one of our children could be susceptible to some of the things going on in the community that were not our values, just put it bluntly. And but he was old enough that I'm like, can't follow this guy around, and he's pretty much moving into young adulthood. And I had a personal conviction that, something, this was other people's kids, maybe I should have been more involved in. maybe we wouldn't have got here. And it was in that time that I heard about MADDES. I happened to go to a community event where Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu was speaking, and some of you may have read some of his books, like Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys was a popular series. And he had written one, Positive Solutions for the Black Community. And he mentioned MADDES as one that dealt with the issues of young men 14 to 25 years old that were committing openly crimes in the community that was disturbing the peace of the community. And he said MADDES had went from theory to practice to deal with that. And that caught my attention, that issue. It wasn't just talking about the problem, that there was a practice in place. And I approached my pastor about it because I had heard him mention in sermons that some things aren't going to change until the men start walking the streets. I was like, well, these guys walk the streets. Perhaps I better have a conversation with him about this, because I didn't want to get connected with something that was doing it the wrong way. And MADDES has a name that makes you wonder, okay, well, what is this approach? And I found it, one, to be in line with my faith convictions, in as much as it's about trying to resolve conflict, not create more conflict. And so an example of what that looks like with us, I just share a story about one night in the streets of Pittsburgh. It was midnight in one of the more violently prone areas. And a couple of young men, a few young men were having a conversation. And in the conversation, one of them was upset because he was having a problem visiting one of his children. He was not with the mother. The mother was with another person at the time. And he had gone to visit 3 times, and 3 times this man that was living in the house pulled a gun on him. And so one of our members said, well, you say you went there 3 times and somebody pulled a gun on you. He said, yeah. He said, well, what did you go back the second time for? And it caused the young man to pause and think. He said, yeah, what you go back the second time for if somebody's there that will pull a gun on you? So we need to find a different way to resolve the problem of you seeing your child. There's a different way to deal with this, because in their conversation, his peers, their answer was, you need to go back with a gun the next time yourself. But he needed an opportunity to have a conversation with someone that would suggest there's a different way that we need to look at handling this. And those are the kind of conversations that we regularly engage in the community that, look, do people still get murdered in the community? Yes, they do. But I believe I'm responsible for who comes into my sphere. And when I have an opportunity, or we, since we're now a collective group of people, to bring a different narrative to people that don't know it, what they see is the solution to something like that is, well, I need to go back and maybe even bring another person with a gun with me to make sure I win, you know? And, but it started with, I'm concerned about my own son. It started right there that I see some things that don't look healthy, and I need to get engaged. And by the way, since I brought him up, he's doing fine. Okay, he's moved away from some things he was doing at the time. But I found something that I found was one, within my faith, it teaches things like forgiveness, which is a big problem in the community. You know, how do I get past that person? We had a murder occur where my first wife's father was murdered. He was in a bar. The young man didn't intend to murder him. He was shooting at someone else. He was hit in the heart by a bullet. But when his time for parole came up, the family took the position. There was enough evidence that while he was in prison, he did some things to enrich his life. He got educated. He was remorseful. In fact, he found that he had uncles in his family that were friends of my father-in-law. He was not happy about what he had done. It didn't look like he was likely to come back out and repeat that kind of act. He looked like he had a chance to be a productive member of society. So the family told the parole, say, look, left up to us, we would not be the ones to hold him in prison any longer. Now, someone challenged with unforgiveness, try to hold him in there the rest of his life if they could. But they felt, no, this is hard. It's terrible what happened. But you decide what the length of his sentence would be. It's not going to be us that continues to hold him behind bars, especially with what we're hearing. You know, so I just thought to share a little bit about that.
Very good. Thank you. I would just want to say one thing about Mad Dads. The reason I encountered them 25 years ago was that I found out that there was this group of men who went out at midnight and confronted young men on the streets and said, brothers, you can do better than this. And that is real public kinship. These are guys you don't know. You're taking your life into your own hands, but you are publicly taking a stand to help them to have a better life. And we did as much as we could for them when I was at the foundation. And they have continued over all these years, and they are still with us and they're still developing. And I hope that they will continue, as a matter of fact, this wonderful work of public kinship that they do. Thank you, George. Who wants to be next? Okay, Melly.
Hi. Well, so talking about kinship, I was reflecting on the community that Teatro La Bolsa has been working on, the 5 years that we've been working with community in the area. And I think one of the biggest kinship that we have is the immigration, the community that reaches our projects, and the people that we also reach. Most of them are in a immigration situation, coming from different places, and that make us reflect a lot in how do we find kinship, and how do we find the difference between this kinship and the people there. Because being in a context with from different cultures, we can find this kinship in the immigration, in the being in a different place that is not my culture that is not my people, and we find ourselves together in this, but at the same time we also have other things in our lives that make us very different, like the contact, the approaching, the greetings, the way you interact with the others. So to build community, as you were saying in the beginning, first we need to know ourselves and know how am I able to listen to myself and to our needs to be a better community member. If we don't fix first what we need to fix with ourselves, we won't be able to give 100% of ourselves to the community. So the way we approach this individual and community transformation through theater, it's because theater arts, the drama, it's very similar than the real life, talking about the moral, the ethics, the cultural constructions, the cultural perceptions, all of these things that we live in nowadays in our reality, in our cotidianity, are also built inside a theater play, are also built inside a scene. And it can be magical, from fantasy, but it also can be contextual. So what we've been working lately is with sociodrama. It's a technique where you put community together for them to first know themselves, explore their emotions, explore their own histories, their own stories, to know where I am, where I came from, what do I want, which ones are my real needs that I really need to pay attention to that first before wanting to go and help others. So once the community, it's on that page, like knowing where I am, what do I need, and what am I looking for, then we start looking for this kindship. What kindship do we have between all together? Why are we here? What brought us here? So in some works that, in Colombia, I worked in a neighborhood called Petecuy. Petecuy is a neighborhood like 1 to social economic level. It's with vulnerable people and who were working with, oh, I don't know how to say this in English. You know these cars that are pulled by horses?
Yes.
And people, but not the tourists one, the ones where people put cement and bricks. And so there was this big community of carretilleros, that's the name of this job. Well, it's not this was a big community, and I was doing a community work with them through the art, and it was like very amazed to see how, I mean, they had something in common yet, but they also were people who were displaced from different parts of Colombia. So they also had their own history, and knowing their own history, why this person came from this side and why this person came from this side. Of course, this person was being affected by the guerrilla. This person was being affected for the paramilitaries or for the daily delinquency. Yeah, so different contexts, different stories, but then they have also a situation in their community as carretilleros, and they came up with stories about their lives, and with that we start creating a scene, a theatrical scene where they have their problem, what it's vulnerable, what it's going against their rights, or what's making them uncomfortable with society. This problematic, we put them on the table, we create a story about this problematic, what is it, where is it coming from? Who are the actors here? Who are the characters in the real society? Who are the characters that are interfering to this situation and with this social problematic? Maybe if there is a counselor or a president or a congressist or a community leader or a policeman or a person from the park, all the roles that community has in just one social issue,
Mm-hmm.
to create a real story and then to transform the ends, to transform the results. We already know what happened. Now, what do you think that could be another ending, and how you as a community leader or as a community member can take action on your role, on your character, on this situation, and how all the community can take action on it. With the FACT program, on the spring session, we had a beautiful experience with families from Mount Pleasant. As I mentioned, one of the biggest kindships that we have is the immigration. All of our families were immigrants, generally from Central America. And they came up with the same story. All of them had different stories, different countries, different cultures, but all of them had a close relationship with a fire in Mount Pleasant neighborhood. So there was a fire on a building, and some of these families were living in that building back then. Some of these families were living in that building nowadays. And some of their families were living in the neighborhood and knew about it. So it was a story that was in common to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that story, they created a scene. And then they created a way to find another ending, how community could be better to support the people who were living in that building, for example. And so it's like a very interesting way how theater approaches human identity, human inner knowledge and needs through dramatic exercises of inner knowledge, and how do we respond and act to outside.
Excellent, Melanie. Very, I should say, very telling, and I suppose very picturesque way of looking at how to build public kinship, and that is by creating a drama, which, in fact, is recreating real life, and how you come to grips with how do I find a relatedness with the end result that I want. From Octavia's being able to move quickly with her children to aid someone in distress and take a stand doing that. George and what they do at midnight with boys and building public kinship. And then what you just mentioned is being the change, as Octavia said, that you wish to see, and that changes you, I, and that's what we're trying to get people to see. The public kinship. If you can build that I resilience in yourself, you can change the world around you and the world that you live in. Miss Marlisha, how are you?
I am well. I'm absorbing all this content, all of this
Absolutely.
information. I'm in the chat.
Absolutely. I see. Thank you.
I love everything that's been shared because it's authentic, it's genuine, it's tangible. It's not like we're speaking over or overcomplicating, what public kinship can be, right? It's a very tangible process. It's something that anyone at any age level, any backdrop can engage in. It's not a elitist, this only group thing. This is everyone can join in and believe that there is a space for them in public kinship building. When I think about it in terms of fact, I was typing in there, but the curriculum, when we're talking about my whole self, right? And of course, Octavius can speak in and elaborate on that. But we get to neighborhood pictures after the fact, right? Because we start with us, we start with family, right? And so she chose to do that, I do believe, because it's a me thing first, right? If I can see my
Yes.
family first, if I can see what I could become, then I can go on and then talk about the neighborhood. So it's very accountability based, and it's not like I have to. So sometimes I challenge myself and others, particularly me, if it's something new and I haven't navigated that territory before, I ask myself, okay, do I want to do it? Do I need to do it? A lot of things that I need to do and what we need to do, we might not want to do it, but then I can frame it as, do I have to do public kinship? No, I don't have to do it. I get to do it. And if I say I get to, then it's a privilege, right?
Yes.
It's a privilege to assist my neighbor. It's a privilege to be able to grow and develop family communications and connections and bonding. I get to do this. So it doesn't seem like work anymore. Without hesitation, you just jump in and you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself because you understand it's a privilege.
Right.
I'd like to share my screen real quick and
Please.
show some samples. Okay, so when we're talking about public kinship, I put up some of the links of the work. And of course, I just mentioned with FACT. And we're dealing with the curricula there with the whole self and all of that. I just wanted to showcase that. And then if Octavius, if you wanted to jump in, because you are the creator of this content, I think that would be wonderful for people to see what the program consists of, because it's not just creating art for art's sake, right? It's very missional. And I believe that it encompasses public kinship in a way that anyone could tangibly see the benefit from it. Because there's also the piece of, why should I engage? Why should I participate? What is the benefit, right? Is it going to affect me, or is it just going to affect the next person? No, it affects everybody that participates. And so I wanted to just show, we start with lesson 1, of course, family faces, and this, of course, is all created by Octavius.
Oh, I like
my
this.
whole self, and then who I want to be. You can't really get to this aspirational piece, but you have to face yourself first.
Exactly.
Right? Like, you have to see yourself in the reflection of you. And so I really love the way that it was set up. And do you want to expound a little bit on that? I have some other pieces, but I didn't want to go any further before we talk about this, because it's directly connected to our public kinship on this Zoom, which is, of course, Neighborhood Associates. Everyone on this call I've never met in person, except for Afnan and Alex, but I'm still connected, right? Like, so there's the cultural concept of Kentucky, right? So we have that shared knowledge of what living in Kentucky could possibly be like, Dr. Austin, even if I've never met you before.
Absolutely.
And then I have, the artistic, colleagues on here. We don't have to meet face to face to understand value in each other, right? That is the public kinship right there. So, did you want to talk about any of those components?
Yes, I sure will. So I would like to give some thanks and shout out to Miss Marlo Castillo. She's not on the call with us, but she was very instrumental in helping me format FACT. I am a non-traditional teacher. I am not a certified teacher. I am a parent who saw a need, and I filled that need. I have the experience to do so. And so I did it. I stepped forward. I drew up a plan, and that led me to FACT. And this first part here, family faces, my whole self, and who I want to be, is a construct. We cannot begin to tell our civic stories as it relates to the community until we can tell our own familial and intergenerational stories. And that's why we wanted this intergenerational program, because so much of ourselves are kept from us growing up, especially in the African American community, where a lot of our history was stolen. And so that is very important into being able to tell a civic story, to build public kinship, to do any type of good work within your community, is to know yourself first. That's a quote. You can find that in the Bible and in plenty of other books, know thyself. And so you got to know the type of person you are in order to see where your aims are going to take you out in the world. And so in Unit 1, Family Canvases, it was about putting yourself on the canvas, not putting a picture of yourself, but yourself on the canvas. Speaking to what makes your family, what builds strong bonds in your family, what makes your unit so good, whether it was grandma, from mom, I got aunts and uncles, to my siblings, to my cousins, to my extended family. It all means something to all of us. And those different aspects, we wanted to bring those together in Family Canvas and actually have a discussion around why I am who I am. Not just how I became to be, but why I am and the decisions that led me here. Of course, our basic artistic discussion, because we want everyone to feel like they just have that professional edge when they're describing their work, but also to be able to articulate the story behind your family canvas. So it's not just a title. It's also a meaning. It could be the definition of a family, saying the family canvas. So we wanted to build that construct of, you've got to be your whole self first. You got to be true to yourself before you can go out into the community and be that for anybody else. Right?
Right.
And building that vision is a perfect segue into go, okay, now I see myself. I've seen my reflection. Now, how do I translate that into my neighborhood? My immediate, when I walk out my door, how do I translate how I feel about myself and my family and draw that into a picture of my neighborhood? And that's a part of the asset building that we do here in Southeast DC, because we know we have resilient families, but sometimes they just don't know where to go to get these resources to be advantageous, to say that they've taken advantage of every opportunity. And so in neighborhood pictures, when we first did this, some of the simplest designs came from 5 and 6 year olds who just did a community map. And it was like, my library's here, my school is here. But what does that mean? I go to school to learn. I go to the library to learn more. You know, that's an asset. And so as a child to be able to identify that and know that those are safe havens, that's a neighborhood picture. That's the picture in their mind. And in some of our families, it was trying to change that picture because some of our kids, other than school, had no other assets that they could think of in their community that they could go to in a time of need. Now, that could be people and or places. What has power in your community, where you know you can go, that you can draw strength from. The library is one of those places, whether people don't think it or not. It is a wealth of knowledge. And in the past 20 years, it's become a wealth of resources also, not just books. You can go to the library and take part in so much now that we wanted our people to know that after you're coming out of your home and you're discovering who you are and what you want to see in your world, how do you make that happen? These are the places you go to make that happen. We wanted to change the discussion around our police departments and our fire stations, because these too are safe havens. For my adult population, a lot of people didn't know that you could go and get free CPR at the fire station. And so in building assets and building capacity, it was about putting people in the know of these opportunities and then having them translate that in artistic expression and going, I see the strengths here in my community. Yes, we have things we still need to work on, but we have this right now. We have strong churches. We have strong community members. We have strong neighborhood advisory commissions who come out and put their feet on the street where I live, and they walk my block and they shake my hand. These are assets. And so when we did Unit 2, we wanted that focus to be on what are those assets in your community that you can rely on right now, are there every day, and those people know who they are and they know their purpose, and they're just waiting on you to come so they can share it with you. And so that was really the premise of Unit 2. When we got to Unit 3, community stories, it really was more about telling a story about your community through your community, if that makes sense to everybody. You can't have a community story without the community itself. We wanted the good, the bad, and the not so obvious represented in community stories. In our spring cohort, so this is the in-person, this is the original FACT curricula. So when we moved on to digital and our endeavors to stay intact through COVID-19 and we went to all visual format, that turned into the community mural. We all wanted to tell an accurate and concise story, but we also wanted it to have connections. Like, we don't live in the same neighborhoods, but all of our community stories are connected in one way or another. And like I said, I work with families all over DC. I work with families who run the gamut of social, economic, social, political. I work with all different types of families, all different types of people. And so I've had the experience to go, let's sit down and have a whole different discussion with my Capitol Hill parents. So my daughter goes to a Capitol Hill Montessori school, very different from the schools in the neighborhood where she lives. And so those are like two different conversations when we're coming to tell our community stories. But we all share, like you said, Bob, we all share that common thread, that public. We want our children safe. We want our children to have access. We want our children to be competitive academically. So we want to know that the school that they're coming out of has equipped them. And so I work with a lot of parent groups. I sat on the DCPS Parent Board for Social Emotional Education and Engagement. And they asked, well, what are the best policies for social emotional engagement and to share things within the community? Go to where they are. Ask the people who are living it right now. Don't open your textbook. Don't go to your expert. Go to the people who are living it right now and ask them their story. And then draw your picture based on that. You'll get more engagement that way. And so with the community stories, it's just showing that there's a beauty in all that we are, no matter where you're from. That's our common thread. We all have beauty. We all have the good and the bad, but we all have impactful stories to tell that shape the world around us. And we're nothing if we don't share them with one another. So it's awesome that I was able to be a part of this curriculum development, but now Miss Melly and her team are facilitating it in Spanish. Like, I speak Spanglish. I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I find that so beautiful that like Marlisha and I and the community coordinators like Ms. Shantae, Mr. Rodney, who help facilitate these programs, have all saw this common vision. And now we've been able to do it in another language. So what's the next step for us is what I'm looking forward to is when we get back, when we're able to come back in person, what's the next step for us? And I'm giddy to know that we've built this common thread. We have this public kinship. And now where we're going next with it? It's like a rocket ship. We're fueled up. Somebody just got, hit that button because we're on the bigger and better things. And so like, I'm so glad to be a part of FACT and having people like Marlisha on board to bring those ideas to the community, things I'd never thought of as a teaching artist. Because like I said, I have no formal training. I am self-taught. I am just that determined to look, I know how to do it. I've got so many years under my belt. So when I get with professionals like Marlisha and Melly and Shantae and Marlo, who, like I said, she was the teacher who formalized my curriculum. She made it look like a teacher did it. Thank you, Marlo. I feel empowered to do more because I'm on a team of people who share my vision.
Thank you. I couldn't say it like you. We tag team it. We tag team it. That's what this conversation is for, right?
That's my specialty. I can narrate it all day.
Exactly. This is the segue to another project that I worked on, and I think it's important to talk about how one project can inspire components of another project. And so a visual storytelling project that I did recently, we talked about the United Nations 17 sustainable goals, right? So when we think of community, what exactly do you want to change in your community? Because every community doesn't have the same concerns, right? And so even with asset mapping, recently we worked on an activity where we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we created our own. And so when children were creating their map, they were talking about, well, do I have a park near me? Are there really green spaces near me? If there's no trees, there's no tree canopy, then your air quality is lower. A 7 or 8-year-old child is not going to say, I have poor air quality. Like that's just not in their that's not in their vocabulary. That's not in the verbiage. But they will say, I have to drive 3 bus stops over to get to a playground. Mm-hmm. That lets me know, right, that there's something missing. And then we circle back and we talk about what's missing and who can fix it. That's the civic engagement piece. Like how exactly. Where do you go to find out how you can get more trees? How can you build a community garden? I've asked questions of just food, right? Children may not think grocery store. How far is away from this grocery store? Some children, if you have to go a street over, that's one thing. But if you go a city over, which is the case in some parts of Louisville, Kentucky, they may go to Southern Indiana to get groceries. And this is still a reality in 2021, which means that that's a food desert. Child doesn't know terminology, food desert. They just understand that I get in a car, I get in a bus, and I go to another city to bring groceries home. And so just using something as simple as the ability for children to do art projects and craft projects based on what they see, and then circle it back to, okay, here's sustainable development goals. Like, what do you really want? A sustainable city and community? Do you want higher education, good health and well-being? This is what these children are saying. This is what families are saying, but they're saying it through art. And I really do believe that that is a strong way to build, in our sense, public kinship, a way for anyone at any level to come in and want to participate in the idea that what I do or what I feel, I'm not the only one feeling it. Because then there's a level of isolation, especially right now. We're in Zoom land and everything's virtual. Can you imagine if I'm the only one that feels like education's an issue, or I only feel like, well, there's no food right here, or bad economics, right? There's everything but what I need is right here. But then you think, okay, well, there's another family, they're saying the same thing. There's another family saying the same thing. Now you have a community of people that are concerned. And now they're concerned and motivated, and they have tools to communicate how to change that. So art, in many ways, for me, is a path, right? It's not the end result. It's not how pretty the art looks. It's not, yours is better than mine. It's taking that art and using it as a conduit for something else. So in this particular endeavor, we're talking about stories. And I believe, Octavius, you stated stories are stolen, or our history. Different parts of history are stolen or dumbed down or not told correctly. The entire portion of this project that I worked on, we're talking about uplifting community voices and telling stories that either were told wrong from jump or they were missed altogether. So I'm just going to share this clip and then
education, and well-being, how can we circumvent visual art? There is no way to truly sever people and land, and as visual beings, intersectionality among these sectors is inevitable. As we explore social justice through the lens of public health, education, and well-being, how can we circumvent visual art? There is no way to truly sever people and land, and as visual beings, intersectionality among these sectors is inevitable. I am a visual artist, an interdisciplinary artist. Much of the narratives that I share visually are abstract works intertwined with portraiture. I am a writer, storyteller, community researcher, and among other capacities, an art educator, which affords me the gift to engage with diverse populations year-round. To share and learn and grow, all the while uplifting people right smack dab in the middle of their communities, their stories, their native-born spaces, their well-traveled spaces, their uncertain how long we will reside here spaces, their newly found earmarked unfamiliar spaces, lives impacted by people and land interactions. To meet people right where they are. I am Marlisha.
When looking at it again, it looks so dramatic.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Looks so
Thank you.
dramatic.
Yeah, that's great.
Inspirational. Have to create
That's
one of
wonderful,
those.
wonderful, 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 wonderful.
But
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. One of the things we want to do is I'm going to ask the staff if they could pull up the think tank, because what you've been doing today is something that we wanted to also try out, is that we are now a think and do tank. That is, we do fact, we do work, but we think. Someone said on this panel, ask us. We can tell you. Well, you also sometimes need to have a way to get that thought out. And so we have created the Public Kinship think tank. So from now on, when you're ready, we will be hosting throughout the starting in July. I will be online with the think tank to come in, and we'll have hours set up, but we won't have to have hours after a while. We will simply have the think tank there, and you can leave your ideas and your thoughts, and people will talk with you and come up with thoughts for you. There's our think tank there, and now you can see, you can go into the Public Kinship think tank. It's set up with various forums and sites, and then you can begin to have discussions with people around the country on this issue. This is not an issue that's going to go away. We've got to build public kinship, and why can't you lead us in this public kinship idea? Because you're already doing it. You're doing it mainly through art, and public kinship through art is just as it's really very, very tactile and very emotional, and people love art. So I think we have one strand already built out. I think that George and I are still sort of in that group. We're with the old fellows. We're very interested in that, getting on the ground with the people and seeing what we can get people to do. But I do think that today has been the beginning of something very important. Gosh, you've just been so wonderful, and your storylines and your drama and your understanding of what needs to be done. And the fact that we can all agree that we might not call public kinship the same phrase, but we do know what do unto others as we would have them do to us. We all understand that. And I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and Alex, you can close us out and tell people how they can reach us, and tell those from Listen First how they might reach us as well, and see what comes next.
Octavius Brown is a community organizer and curriculum developer living and working in Washington, D.C. She is also a teaching artist in NAC's Families Are Artists, Creators, and Teachers program, or FACT. You can learn more about FACT at fact2genart.org. George Spencer is national president of Mad Dads and president and co-founder of the Greater Pittsburgh chapter of Mad Dads. Please visit them at maddads.com. Meli Strovo Valencia is the co-founder and education director of Teatro La Bolsa here in Washington, D.C. Please follow them on Facebook. She is also a teaching artist in the FACT program. Marlisha Woods is an interdisciplinary artist living, creating, and teaching in the greater Louisville metro area, where she also heads up the FACT Louisville program. You can learn more about Marlisha, her work, and her new interactive online studio at elzao.design. Bobby Austin is the president of Neighborhood Associates Corporation here in Washington, D.C. To learn more about Neighborhood Associates and about Public Kinship, visit us at neighborhoodassociates.org. You'll find there the Public Kinship Toolkit and a lot of the other resources that we have talked about today. You can contact us at contact@neighborhoodassociates.org. Please also visit us on social media to learn about what we are up to and what our friends, our colleagues, partners, and supporters are up to as well in the world of public kinship. Thanks very much to our panel, to the Listen First Project, and above all to all of you for joining us today.
Okay, it's me, Karen, from Chile, and I've been here for 15 years, almost 15 years, and I'm so happy and I'm so proud. Teatro La Bolsa and all of us are working together on this type of subjects that are so important for me since I came here. I said, well, this is my job here. I'm an actress and a teacher, so I combine both. We create this company, and the idea of work with the community is something that I always been following. So I'm very excited that we have the opportunity to be here and also to work with FACT. And as well, we have a lot of projects to work with the community, with the artistic community, also with women, because also we work supporting and making plays and making art for the violence violence against women. So this is our whole big project we are working, which we're going to have a virtual performance tomorrow. And it's very important for us too, because that also supports women from here, from this community, which is a beautiful multicultural community. And yes, this is the place that I decided to stay with my family too, and have my kids here, because I love the multicultural, and I love to learn from different stories, to hear from different cultures. It's very enrichful, and I'm glad we are here. So let's keep working on all these matters, please. Thank you so much for doing all this work too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen. Well, Nolan, why don't you tell them what you do, because that would get them a better understanding of the reach that you have throughout this country in trying to bring these kinds of ideas and programs to fruition. And I know that Howard is on too as well. So would you do that for me?
Sure, absolutely. Howard and I have been working for over 3.5 years on not taking on any specific mission ourselves, but curating all of the movements out there that are intersecting. The Public Kinship movement, which definitely deeply intersects the Listen First Coalition, and in fact, this is an example of it, the National Conversation Week. Our goal is to go from National Conversation Week to 10,000 communities having weekly conversations, and then beyond that, because that in itself, that gets you at public kinship, that gets you to listening to one another, that gets you to building social capital. But the real goal here is to also, if we're truly trying to empower what we call compassionate communities or beloved community, then we need to both understand one another and have that public kinship, but also be educated as to the tools of empowerment, whether that be economic empowerment, triple bottom line economy, where people and planet are part of the equation, or it's what I'm particularly passionate about, deliberative democracy, the idea of a government being responsible and accountable at every level, local to federal, to the constituents, to we the people, because it's only when you put all those cultural, political, and economic pieces together, they hang together pretty tightly, and if we don't address all of them, we end up not being as optimal as we could be. So our idea is to cultivate compassionate communities across the country, where public kinship is the basically the first step. It's the caring culture piece of the equation.
Yeah. Norland, you have the famed Michael Schumann on the line, and since we can never get him, Why don't you tell him what you want him to know while we have him tapped in?
Hi, Michael.
Hi there.
Well, by the way, this is a little bit inside for all the people that don't know. You and I need to talk pretty soon about the fact that the Faith Plus Finance people are now involved with Duke Seminary's project. There is an organization out there, and Bobby, I have already told you about them, this Thriving Cities organization, that the leader of that, Josh Yates, is now the executive director of this Ormond Center at Duke Seminary. Now, this is coming at it from a faith direction, but we're focused on that as well, outreach to churches for them to be ultimately civic anchors and community anchors.
Mm-hmm.
But there is now there's this stuff starting to tighten to where I think there's this shot at getting some impact investors to actually invest in what we're all talking about.
Right. And I think Octavia's mentioned the church as being anchors in her communities, which is true. And I know, Marlisha, this is the same thing that would be true. And George mentioned his church as well. So we have a lot of thinking, cross-cultural, cross-line thinking we're going to do in this public kinship think tank. Andy is saying something. Andy, I see you up there.
Hey, Bobby,
hey,
Alex, and everybody else. Good to see you.
Tell us who you are.
I'm Andy Swindler. I'm in Chicago. I'm part of an organization called Feel Real, and we really focus on, deep and intimate dialogue spaces because we think that's.
Andy, I never told you. That sounds like that ought to be a blues song. Feel Real. I like that.
Oh, I take that as a compliment. I'll be thinking.
It is a compliment.
Okay. Well, we're in Chicago, so I guess that makes sense. So, we just think, as you mentioned, I think I missed part of the presentation, but, in terms of story, sharing stories within the community, going deeper together, all of that, and really this rather, really, as I understand, an ancient act of circle practice, bringing that
Absolutely
back in. And, a couple things that I'm involved here in Chicago are with mutual aid networks that are involved in the last year. As well as restorative justice. So I'm curious, and if that was covered, I could go look at the recording, but, curious how mutual aid and restorative justice are weaving into some of these community initiatives.
Is that Gloria on? Hello. This is marvelous. I am so thrilled at hearing each of you. And your involvement on what you've been doing during the pandemic. And pandemic has not stopped you from.
No, it is not.
But taking you to another level, so to speak. And Bobby, after your speaking in public kinship, I was probably using different words for it.
Yes, I think we all do.
I tuned into self-awareness is such a key thing that a lot of people, walk around totally unaware of who they are, much less how their behavior is impacting others. And things like forgiveness that George brought up.
Mm-hmm.
You have to relearn how to do these things in the public domain because we're being held back. Ignorance and the whole idea of bringing back to a community and affirming people's basic value and intelligence to learn and do instead of starting off with some of these narratives about how less than we are.
Yeah. If we could just get that one lesson, Gloria, that would be enough.
Yeah, congratulations. This is wonderful. I hope you keep on doing it. I'll be supportive as long as I can.
Yeah, I wanted to make another remark about something about Mad Dads. I referenced Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu's book about positive solutions for the Black community. But I think it's important for me to say now, Mad Dads we do not define ourselves by race. It started out as a Black organization, but quickly recognized that all fathers felt the same way about the well-being of their children. And I think it's important to point that out, that
it is
actually Mad Dad should reflect the demographics of whatever of the city where it's at. You know, and we have had chapters that were predominantly other ethnic groups, including Native Americans, and in the spectrum of America. So I thought it was important for me to say that. And also within that, it creates very interesting experiences in some of the more multicultural settings. In fact, we had some interesting dialogues that happened in Pittsburgh during the recent years, you know, the dynamics of the country, where the challenges of judgment for an individual could come into question about, hey, did you know so-and-so is a Trumper? I said, well, how do you know that? And well, I'm looking at his Facebook page and et cetera, and, you know, and has some very strong passions about it. And I'm like, well, have you talked to him? Have you talked to him? You're asking me, and I get it. I understand why you're asking, but have you talked to him and said, well, why do you, what is it that causes you to support the individual? It may not be some of the things that bother you. It may be some things that if you heard the person's reason, so, okay, well, you may be more passionate toward other social justice issues. It causes you to lean more to another candidate, but the extremes of positions different people have in politics, you only know if you talk to them about, well, what are the things that attract you to a particular candidate? It gets to be a very interesting dialogue. So, but we united on this mission.
No, that's a good public kinship issue, because exactly. I think one of the issues that's going to come up more and more in our communities has to do with something we talked about here today, and that's immigration, or, you know, various ethnic and cultural groups within certain communities. We don't talk about that very much, but it certainly is. It's there ready to be discussed. And I think we will, and public kinship is going to be one of the ways I think we're going to have to discuss that and come about with that. So thank you for bringing that up, George. I appreciate that.